Good evening. Welcome to this League of Women Voters sponsored panel entitled GRU Governance, Get the Facts. This forum's purpose is to provide the public with data and data-based conclusions about GRU, its management, relationship to the community, and to the community's future. Most of the evening will be spent listening to the panel's answer to your questions. I'd like to extend a special welcome also to our four panelists from whom you will hear more in just a moment. This event was motivated by the inclusion of the GRU governance referendum on the November ballot, where it appears as City of Gainesville Charter Amendment 1. Gainesville Regional Utilities Authority. I am League Member Jay Rosenbeck, co-chair of the Natural Resources Committee, and I will moderate this evening's presentation. Before I invite each of our panelists to introduce himself, I want to review this evening's activities so that you will know what you have got yourself into. As you arrived, you were handed a 3x5 card on which you can write a question. If you did not get a card, or if you need a pencil, raise your hand. Two League members will be collecting those questions. When you indicate with a raised hand that yours is ready for consideration. These two League members will also be reviewing the questions, culling repeats, and then bringing them to me electronically. And I will then present the question to one or more of the panelists. Your question, therefore, can be directed at 1, 2, 3, all four, or just in general. And to maximize participation of this audience, we will limit everyone to one question. If time permits, we will allow a second. As audience questions are being prepared, League of Women Voters member Dr. Julia Reiskin will present the League of Women Voters position on the GRU governance referendum. After her short presentation, I will ask a single question of each of our panelists, and then we'll turn to the questions generated by the men and women in this room. And as a reminder, you can direct your question to one or more than one of the panelists, or generally, and then they can sort out who's going to provide the answer. Dr. Reiskin has been asked to limit her presentation to 5 or so minutes, although the moderator will grant additional time both to her and to our panelists if the issue is especially complex and needs additional time. And of course, if acknowledged, other panelists may also join in as part of the overall response of the panel, and we'll ask those secondary kinds of comments to be limited to a minute or so. As an aid to our participants, we will be timing this evening's contributions. Our timer down there, actually we have two, will hold up a 1-minute sign to indicate that 1 minute remains in the recommended time period, except for introductions where they'll hand up a 30-second. So let's now begin by having each of the panelists, beginning in alphabetical order, provide us with a 1-minute introduction of their expertise, and let's see, A, B. All right. Mr. Ariola, please.
Thank you, Jay. My name is David Ariola. I am your Gainesville City Commissioner for District 3, which is right here, so welcome to my district. I was born and raised here in Gainesville. My parents came here from Mexico to go to UF, and they found such a great quality of life here, they decided to stay and raise a family, and my two brothers and I. I am here today because with respect to the governor's race and the senator's race, this is the most important issue on your ballot as a Gainesville citizen. The passage of this referendum could affect the next generation here in Gainesville. I have been opposed to this referendum. I will go in more detail as the night goes on. However, make no mistake, this is the key issue on your ballot. Candidates come, candidates go, but I think there is a lot of wisdom in the creators of GRU when they decided that this was the model to select for a community like ours for providing public utility and how to deal with the benefits that come with having a single public utility for the area. So I'm glad you're all here. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll move to our next panelist, Mr. Bolarski.
Hello, my name is Ed Vilarski. I'm the General Manager at GRU. I want to thank the League of Women Voters for inviting me here. Make no mistake about it, there's a lot of things I have to say about the facts associated with GRU, and that's the main reason that I am here. I can't advocate one way or the other for the referendum, so I won't be taking a position. Although, you know, my background is such that I've worked for private boards, I've worked for for-profit boards, I've worked for appointed boards, I've worked for public boards. So, you know, I have a wealth of experience in working in each one of those areas. So it gives me a unique perspective in being able to point out various elements that people ought to consider when they're looking at the referendum. And I think I've done a little bit of that in the past and will continue to do it in the future. So I'm glad to be here, and I guess we'll go to the next alphabetical member.
Thank you. Dr. Jacobson, please.
Hi, I'm Barry Jacobson. I'm a member of the current Utility Advisory Board, though I do not represent the board or any other members of the board's opinions. Everything I say is of my own. I'm also the president of Solar Impact. We're a local solar company. My wife and I started this company 11 years ago, so I spent the last 11 years talking to people about power bills, both inside and outside of GRU territory. I have a PhD in engineering. My wife and I came to Gainesville as students in 1980, so we're very long-term Gainesville GRU customers.
Thank you, and Dr. Curry, please.
My name is Ted Curry. I'm the Director of Energy Studies at the University of Florida's Public Utility Research Center. The Public Utility Research Center, I'm an economist by education, and we work with utility regulators and utility operators all around the world, primarily Latin America and the Caribbean, Sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia, Pacific Rim, and the Pacific Islands. Our flagship program is a 2-week program that we give right here in Gainesville twice a year. At a given delivery, we'll get between 70 and 80 folks from usually 35, 40 different countries. My role on the panel, as I understand it, is to compare various regulatory schemes and utility organization schemes and talk a little bit about how roles and responsibilities change when you move some of those parts around. Thank you.
And thank you, Dr. Curry. And now, I'd like to introduce League member Dr. Julia Weiskin for her overview of the GRU position relative to the League of Women Voters.
Right, and can you hear me? Should I get Jay's
Would you like this microphone? That might make it easier.
All right, as Jay has already explained to you, the subject of tonight's panel discussion concerns the potential change in how GRU is governed. Should it be changed? Yes or no? Get the facts. And at the outset, I will say that the League of Women Voters has taken a position on this, and that is to vote no. In other words, a no vote keeps the public in our public utility. Next slide. No, that's old-fashioned, but that's how we're doing it. So, also as Jay has explained, what is this about? The proposed change of GRU governance and its management. We will vote on this, the Gainesville City Special Referendum, on November 6, 2018. The referendum history. After 3 failed attempts, House Bill 759, which was filed by Representative Clemens, passed, mandating the current referendum. The result of this, if it passes, will be the dissolution of part of our city's charter, replacing it with a special act of the legislature. This is in direct opposition to the principle of home rule, one of the State League's legislative priorities for 2017-2019. And this is the description: to support the retention of a 1968 constitutional amendment to ensure home rule for counties and municipalities, and oppose any legislation inconsistent with the League of Women Voters voter positions. So home rule issues. Basically, in order to change the charter of the city, it has to be either citizen or commission initiated, but not by legislative action. And we just checked state law and the city law, and that's how we read it. But this process was done in secret with some, but little, local input. Objections were lodged by city and county commissions, various citizens, State Representative Clovis Watson, the Florida Municipal Electric Association, but these were all ignored. So House Bill 759 implements a new Florida law, and citizens will be unable to change the provisions. Only the state legislature can do this. So a quote from Representative Clovis Watson: "Never in the history of the Florida legislature have we had a change in municipal governance in this manner." So this is the ballot language, and I'm only going to focus on the second line. Shall the charter of the city be amended to create the Gainesville Regional Utilities Authority, ... Move on. This sounds innocuous, but you should read the whole House Bill 759 for what it really says. And the most important fact is that nowhere is it mandated that electric rates will be lowered. Nothing is said about that. But it will create the Gainesville Regional Utilities Authority with total power over GRU, which will include the ability to reduce the general fund transfer to the city. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Be modifiable only by the state legislature, have control over GRU assets and finances, have the power of eminent domain. It has defined qualifications of authority members and with limited ability for them to be removed. Okay, now a little bit about GRU. As you well know, your utility bill includes electric, gas, water, wastewater, stormwater, refuse collection. And in addition, GRU is an integral part of Gainesville, helping pay for much needed services such as police, fire, parks, think depot and the Sweetwater Restoration Parks, stormwater control, wastewater, etc. Furthermore, GRU is committed to sustainability through water reclamation projects, recycling and use of storm debris as an alternative energy source, all much valued by the city's residents. The other thing to think about is Gainesville's funding dilemma. Approximately 1/3 of the city's general fund comes from GRU. Additionally, less than 42% of the city's property is taxable, compared with Davie, 85%, Ocala, 74%, and even Tallahassee, 55%. And that's because much of our property is basically university-based, so it's state. So the importance of the general fund transfer is that it is the citizens' return on their investment in GRU. Without this, either services would be cut or property taxes would be increased. It's your choice. And lastly, just go through how GRU is governed. City residents elect members to the commission, who are the board of directors of GRU, which is managed by utility professionals. The city commission appoints members of the UAB, of which Dr. Jacobson is one member. These are city county residents with experience in business, law, finance, engineering, environmental science. And members can be removed by the commission for various reasons. But citizens have the final say. They can vote members of the city commission out of office. This is home rule. Thank you.
And thank you, Dr. Reiskin. We will now begin with the questioning. As the audiences are coming in, we will ask each of our panelists a specific question based on issues the community has been raising in the paper, in other public forums, and in personal discussions with some of us. We'll begin the questioning with Mr. Bolarski. Many citizens are concerned about GRU's rates. Questions for you are, how high are they compared to others, and how fast have they been increasing? And what other facts, Mr. Bolarski, about rates might be useful for the public to know?
Thank you, sir. I brought my handy-dandy tripod here because I think visual is really important for this. It's one thing for me to say some numbers, it's another thing for you to see them. Oops. You're all paying attention, you passed. Can you see that? Okay. I'll be like the lady at the boxing, you know, round one. But you can see here that the blue line up through here is our bill for 1,000 kW. That's the gold standard in measuring bills across the country. And back in 2015, we were at $141 for a residential bill, 1,000 kW usage. We went down to $133 in 2016. We went down to $130 in 2017. And then this past year, with the purchase of the biomass plant, we went down to $121. So over the past 3 years, using comparable consumption, which is really the important thing to understand, using comparable consumption by all residents, our bills have went down $20 a month. That's 14% on the residential bill. Now, in my mind, that's not soaring residential rates, unless you look at it this way. Maybe that's soaring, but you have to look at the X and Y axis the right way. So that's the reality, folks, but that's not being told to anybody. And it's frustrating as all get out for me, being the general manager of GRU, to have these mistruths talked about us. Adding to this, I'd like to, and I did a little bit of work on this. My friend David Warm over there put this together, but I added a few lines. The red line here is the chamber goal of being 1/2 of 1% of the FMEA average, 1/2 of 1% of the standard deviation, I'm sorry. So back when we were at 141, it was at $125. That was the goal. So we were $16 a month higher. Well, the next year, we got $13, within $13. And then we got within $8. And this past year, we got within $3 in 3 years. Now, the other interesting thing about this graph, and probably some of you can't really see it that well, but the average for the independent IOUs, the independent operating utilities, it's $125. Ours is at $121. So the other part is the blue part. That's where our rates would have been if we hadn't purchased the biomass plant. It would have been at $133. Instead, we're at $121. Now, probably most of you in the room have never even seen this, but instead think we're $50, $60, $70 higher than other comparable utilities. It's not true. Just not true. By the way, Duke is actually higher than our rates or higher than our bills for comparable amounts. Clay, we're about $7 more expensive. So that's the main point I wanted to deliver regarding our bills. And I'm sure there'll be some other questions later on.
I appreciate that contribution and those data. Our next question will be of Dr. Curry. Dr. Curry, the passage of HB 759 requires voters to choose between two GRU governance models. The current model of governance by the City Commission with support of the Utility Advisory Board, and the proposed model, which would shift management and governance of GRU to an autonomous authority. How are oversight, strategic planning, and public accountability addressed or affected under each of these models? And if you don't think that that question will require 3 minutes, you can certainly yield some of your time to other panelists. Thank you, Dr. Curry.
There are actually elements of it that don't. And that's because the law, HB 759, like a lot of laws, it's really specific on the what, a little bit fuzzier on the how. Now, we look at the law, and the first provision is that this authority would operate, manage, and control the utilities. It does lay out some specifics. The authority would be responsible for producing a budget. The authority would be responsible for filing a consumer report that includes rate projections and rate comparisons. The authority would be responsible for hiring the general manager. The authority would be responsible for setting the general manager's salary. The authority would not be responsible for any other personnel decision, salary or hiring or firing. That's basically what it says. So what operate, manage, and control means beyond those specific provisions, we don't know. We can look at other authorities in the state of Florida, somebody like Fort Pierce, a relatively small utility compared to Gainesville, a quarter of the size, a fifth of the size. There, the board approves $90,000 budget transfers and $30,000 contracts with suppliers. Would this authority do that? We don't know. The authority in Orlando approves fuel contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Would this authority do that? We don't know. So if the authority is, if the initiative is enacted and the authority is established, one of the first orders of business is going to be actually to find what they are going to do. But simply by looking at the act and reading about what it says, the fact is we just don't know.
Thank you very much, Dr. Curry. To you, Mr. Ariola. If asked, most people would say that they would like lower utility bills. However, it seems that their answers become more varied or less sure when the first question is paired with a second question about what they would tolerate to compensate for reduced rates. Would they tolerate higher taxes? Would they tolerate reduced services or some other reduction? So the question specifically is, what data can you provide about bills, rates, taxes, and city services, and in a sense, build upon Mr. Bolarski's answer to the first question?
Thank you. Well, to be clear, my responsibility is to make decisions on the wholesale. So whenever I'm making large financial decisions, I have to balance them against every interest in the city budget. Keep in mind that the budget of GRU, what actually comes out of the GRU budget, if I don't want to be mistaken, but it's about 10, 11% of the total budget. And that goes into the general government budget, which is about 126 million. So we're talking about $38 million in the general government budget. That is almost a third of our budget for general government, 2/3 of which is spoken for salaries and pensions. The other third being everything else that you get. So when we talk about how do we balance GRU bills with the interest of the city, there's a couple of things you have to look at. Number one, GRU is doing a lot to help people individually, because oftentimes it can be an individual situation. There's a lot of homes here which have poor weatherization and have not been addressed in a very long time. GRU helps provides certain funding for the Community Weatherization Coalition, which actually goes out and does energy audits and helps people find those problems. People have reduced their energy bills by more than 30% just by going through that avenue. But when looking at the wholesale things, I can tell you the most important thing that we can do for GRU to deal with this issue is looking at smart metering. Right now, I don't know how this came to be, but the GRU meters are about 20 years, technology-wise, out of date. Smart metering is something that will allow the meters at your home to be read at GRU instantaneously. You'll be able to have, and I will definitely advocate for this should I be on the commission, you'll be able to have an app where you can see what your usage is, water, electricity, all that. That is not new technology. That has been around for a very long time. That is something that we can do to help alleviate on the wholesale issue. But individually, there's also a lot that we need to be doing. And that's why we support the CWC. That's why we offer the LEAP program, which helps people with who are struggling to pay their bills. This is by no means a small issue, but I don't want you all to think that by changing governance structures and by changing the scope of decision making that you're going to be addressing bills. Because when you create an independent authority, which now governs just GRU and decides how much money they're going to send to the city, they don't have to decide what they're going to cut from the city budget. They can just say, we're going to reduce the transfer, here you go, you all decide what to cut. And if they reduce that by $1 or $2 million, that $1 or $2 million could be people's jobs. It could be vital service. We're working on expanding fire services for GFR, and that will cost about $1 million. These are the types of things that you have to consider. An independent board would only have purview over one part of a very complex city government. And I'm proud that I get to balance all of them, even though it's not the easiest thing in the world, I assure you. Okay.
Is there some time I could piggyback on that?
There certainly is time for all the piggybacking we need.
Because I agree with the Commissioner entirely, but the one area to quantify if services were to remain the same, and the young lady over there talked about the reduction in the general fund transfer. The referendum allows for a 3% reduction on an annual basis. That's about $1.14 million that would not go to the city. To retain the same service level, they could increase property taxes. So for a 3% reduction in the GFT, it would result in 89 cents a month reduction in your electric bill. But to cover that, the city would have to increase property taxes by $1.49 on a $200,000 home. So there's almost a 2-to-1 relationship to make up for the reduction in the general fund transfer that would go to the city. Because what you're effectively doing is you're narrowing the tax base to which you can collect those additional money. So right now, it's through the customer base of GRU. With the reduction in the GFT, it would be simply city residents. So ostensibly, you would create a situation where city residents would choose to pay more money in property taxes and more than the reduction they get in their electric bill. Kind of an ironic situation.
Thank you very much. We'll turn now to Dr. Jacobson. There has been a lot of speculation about how the autonomous authority would manage GRU differently from what is now done. Dr. Jacobson, what do you think the differences and the impact of those differences might be?
Well, I mean, I'm part of my background is I'm a modeler, not a model, but a modeler. And so I look for things, you didn't have to laugh. It's a tough crowd. So the current UAB has very similar criteria to what this new independent authority would have. The current UAB, half of us were selected by a fairly conservative commission, half were selected by a much more liberal commission. So we have a pretty good mix. There's been a lot of speculation. Some of you may have seen some ads on TV. It's going to cut your rates. The current UAB, when we most recently voted for our recommendation, we said increase your rates at 3.1%. 4 of the members said 3.1, 2 of them said 2%, but everyone was in favor of an increase. And I stand by that vote. It was the right thing, and it is the right thing to do. But that's because GRU, as a business owner, I look at GRU and I say the employees are underpaid. It's hurting the employees and it's hurting profitability for GRU. I believe that. The IT system's terribly antiquated. So these are all reasons for GRU to do what they're doing. As an independent authority, if I were on there, I would be voting to increase rates. I'm not saying I would always vote to increase rates, but currently, based on what we have, that's what I would be doing. The members of the UAB are concerned about low-income housing. As Commissioner Ariola talked about, we're interested in targeted ways to help people who are dealing with their bills, but just lowering everyone's rates just doesn't seem to be an effective way to do that. Also, one of my first meetings as a UAB member was an independent study that was done that said commercial rates are sky high. And I can tell you, I look at bills every day, and GRU rates on the commercial side are high. Residential, not so much. They said we should be lowering commercial rates and basically increasing residential rates. The reason that I believe this hasn't been happening is because the citizens of Gainesville pushed on the city commission to say, keep the residential rates low. So that's something you would be looking at happening. As Commissioner Ariola said, a lot of his job, and I don't envy you your job, I appreciate that you do what you do, is thinking about how to balance all that stuff. For me to vote on what the appropriate transfer from GRU to the city just doesn't make sense. It's easy to go, yeah, let's reduce that, but I don't have to sit there and deal with the impacts. So if the independent authority says year after year, another 3%, another 3%, that's a huge impact. You're shutting down services right and left pretty quick about that. I believe GRU is run by experts. We are here to provide oversight, to give some independent input, to look at big policy pictures. They're the experts. I like the current system, quite honestly, that you have the city commission filling their role, you have the UAB filling our role. If you look at other examples like Jacksonville Electric, you say, hey, there's an independent board, why don't we do what they're doing? They're in a $4 billion boondoggle. They've signed on for the nuclear power deal that they're probably going to get nothing out of. Makes the biomass plant, which we are getting something out of, look really pretty good. So independent authority does not necessarily mean a good deal. Thank you.
Does anyone feel the need for a piggyback? No? All right.
Well, I like to piggyback. The questions come up about, well, yeah, your commercial rates are really high. We've closed the gap considerably. We have 3 different commercial rates. We have general service non-demand, general service demand, general service large demand. To give you an idea, we've reduced the general service non-demand from $256 a month on average for 1,500 kW to $216. So it's $41 over a period of 3 years. The general service demand, which is 75 kW, 30,000 kW hours, has went from $4,400 a month to $3,600 a month, $700 in that same period of time. And then our large demand customers, the big kahunas that are out there, that's a technical term. Back in 2015, they were paying $58,700, and now they're paying $49,000. So they went down $9,400. The commercial customers are seeing dramatic reductions over this period of time. Are they higher than we want? Yes. Are we going to try to make that better? Yes, and we are. But this idea, and I'll keep repeating it, rates are not soaring. Birds soar. GRU rates fall for the most part over the past 3 years. Thank you.
And thank you for those introductory comments and good answers to complex questions. We're now going to turn to the questions that have arisen from the people here in the audience. This one is not directed at any particular one of you, so you'll be able to work out how you would like to proceed and in what order. The question is as follows. In its current structure, GRU's customers who reside in the county have no voice regarding GRU. The proposed structure will include representation from the county. Why shouldn't I vote yes and have a choice? And so that's the question, and who would like to go first?
I'll jump into this one
All right,
first.
thank you, Mr. Beer.
So, first of all, it is not true that there is no representation. It is not as though they have been left out completely. My understanding is that members of the UAB are in this residency, and members of the UAB, right, there he goes, right, Dr. Denzel, everyone. And the UAB is part of the governance structure. One of the first things that I said when I got on the city commission is I could not imagine GRU without the UAB. It's very important, and that's why I've been supportive of them from the beginning. Also, if you live in the county and you pay GRU bills, this does not preclude you from campaigning for or against city commission candidates. You may not be able to vote for those candidates, but as I have learned in my time, in my many, many years on this earth, you get to affect a lot more when you're involved in these campaigns. And so there are people who campaign for and against city commissioners largely based on GRU positions, and that's okay, that's the way that it should be. So I disagree with the notion that there is no representation. What I will say is that if you have many of these independent boards and private companies, you're not able to sit on those boards anyway. You're not able to have representation there anyway. You don't get any representation with Duke, FP&L. But with GRU, there are ways that you can get involved. There are ways that you can affect the decisions.
Thank you. And other members of the panel? Dr. Gard, please.
With the caveat that I don't have a position on this initiative, and I would certainly never presume to tell any of you how you should vote. And that was the premise of the question, why should I, I'm not going to tell you what you should be voting. That's your decision. But one of the things, as I mentioned, HB 759 is gray in a lot of areas. And one of the areas is, how is this board going to be financed? Establishing an independent regulatory board, it's not free. True, the commissioners on this board are not going to draw a salary, but that's not the same thing as it's going to be free. So there's still going to be per diem, there's still going to be expenses. All that's in the law. That they will be reimbursed, certain expenses. We don't know if this board is going to have a staff of some sort. So we don't know how much it's going to cost to actually run this. And we don't know how that's going to be recovered. Typically, regulatory authorities like the Florida Public Service Commission in Tallahassee, they are financed through a per kilowatt hour assessment on everybody's bill. So, if this authority is going to be financed through a per kilowatt hour assessment on everybody's bill, with the caveat, we don't know, the law doesn't say that one way or the other. But if it is, don't make the mistake of thinking that folks outside the city are not necessarily going to be paying for this, because I don't know if it's likely or not. It's, as I said, it's a gray area. But there's plenty of precedent within the state and within the country, for that matter, for the costs associated with this authority to be spread among all the customers.
Thank you very much.
Just real quickly, I look at a lot of bills all over. I hear this a lot about the county residents. They pay 8 to 10% more. We see this across many utilities. If you live farther out, if you live out in the county, your lines are longer, there's a surcharge on your bill. If you're a Duke customer, FP&L customer, many of the customers, this is very common. And as was said, you don't get to sit on the board of that either or have an influence. FP&L's tough to talk to.
I'd like to add one thing to this. The idea, I agree with the idea of Duke and FP&L not having representation, but the very concept itself is flawed. that it's taxation without representation, because literally what it is for GRU is a profit, just like Duke has a profit. And so that profit is turned over to the city that owns it. And they do with that what they would, just like Duke would. Now in GRU's case, profit turns over to the city, it stays here. With Duke, it goes to North Carolina, and they do what they want to in North Carolina, or they pay dividends to their folks all over the world. So this idea of taxation without representation is wrong on its face. It's not taxation, it's profit. And because it's not taxation, there doesn't need to be taxation without representation. It's pretty simple.
Thank you. Question elicited an answer from every panelist. Good question. Here's another one. Given the scientific perspective for future climate change, with our present fuel sources, what is envisioned for long-term biomass use? Again, not directed at any particular one, so I'll leave it to the panel. Mr. Ariola?
One of the first initiatives that I introduced on the City Commission was a goal to set GRU on a path to be 100% renewable energy in this century. I wasn't going to put a hard deadline, but the initiative needs to be set because as we can see, particularly in our state, the dangers of climate change have begun to be felt, and they're only going to get worse. I don't think we imagined 10 years ago that we would see 3 500-year storms brush across the state. I don't think we imagined that we would see for 11 months red tide that is washing up all kinds of deceased sea life. It is the largest issue facing our state, and the people who caused it are running for even higher office. The biomass plant is a good point to bring up because it is part of our renewable energy portfolio. I can tell you that one of the most difficult decisions that I had to make when I got on the commission was whether or not to buy out the PPA, the Purchasing Power Agreement, which was the main source of issue because it guaranteed that the city had to pay $78 million, about $77 or $78 million a year, whether we use the energy in full or not, which to me was completely nonsensical, and I agree that needed to go. And I don't like having to shell out $750 million up front, but when you look at the long-term expenditures, we're going to save the city about $1 billion with that purchase. And now we have renewable energy stock. We're able to use it however much we want. The people at GRU were able to get it to operate at half its capacity, where the contract only said that you can run it as low as 70, and they've got it running as low as what?
We're down to 30 megawatts.
30 megawatts because they're running it now. So the problem with the biomass plant was never the plant itself. It was the power purchasing agreement that caused the problem. That thing is gone. It's shredded. It's gone. It has no more bearing. And it's true we have debt service payments to make for the next 27 years, but we would have had to pay $77 million a year with that contract in place, and we've cut that in half.
I'm very pleased the commissioner brought that up about the biomass plant, because when I showed the graph and I walked around, you saw that if we still had the contract for the power purchase agreement, we would be at $133 a month, and now we're at $121. So that's $12 a month on bills that are being saved, and the escalation isn't in there going forward. Yes, we had to monetize the purchase of that plant and spend $750 million, but it got us out of a future expenditure of $2 billion. Now, I'd like to add a little bit because there's an informed crowd out there. There's some historical things that have happened since the purchase of the biomass plant. At any particular time, in what we call shoulder months, where you're not using as much load, everyone's not using their electricity to full demand, early in the morning, when we're seeing that we can have all our plants operating or idling. Whereas in the past, because we had operated 70 megawatts, we had to shut 1 or 2 of them down. When you shut a big facility down and then ramp it up, it's called thermal cycling. And it takes economic value away from the plant. And we lost a lot of economic value during the period of this power purchase agreement to that thermal cycling. We don't do that now. And it's bringing huge amounts of benefits to us. plant's better maintained, and it gives it future useful life. Back when we got involved in the power purchase agreement, we knew that one of the plants, Deer Haven 1, which is a gas plant, and it's voltage used for load regulation, which is the shock absorber on our system. When people turn on their switches, when they get up in the morning and they're using the hot water, this thing goes up, and then at night it goes down, so we're modulating back and forth, right? We have created with Deer Haven Renewable, which we call the biomass plant, I'm getting the 1 minute, I hope I don't get to stop. We are actually creating a clone of this plant. We were planning on retiring this in 2022. We may not have to retire it then and replace it for $125 million. We got the plant. So that's additive to the savings that we've seen in buying out the power purchase agreement. So this is, as the commissioner said, better than $1 billion savings for the community and for GRU. So I'll be quiet.
And just real
Thank
quickly,
you.
real quickly, I just have a question for Mr. Pilarski.
Thank you.
So I will turn the rest of my time over. How does the cost of the electricity produced by the biomass plant compare to our other sources?
Right now, it's the second cheapest in our portfolio. Kelly, which is the old granddad down there in Center City, is the cheapest, but it's cheaper than the coal plant. It is cheaper than the coal plant. It's also cheaper than some of the combustion turbines that we have out there that are 30, 40 years old. And it's our newest facility. So it gives us a lot of flexibility. It's newer, and it's been a wonderful addition for the GRU.
And just to generalize the question a little bit, I'm not going to talk specifically about the biomass, but the strategic planning aspect. Again, from the law, it's not clear if the new authority is formed, what role it would have in the strategic planning process, so that overall vision. But there are 5 utilities that have, municipal utilities that have boards in Florida. You got JEA, OUC, New Smyrna Beach, Kissimmee, and Fort Pierce. And in all 5 of those cases, those boards are strategic planning, or a say in the strategic planning process is part of it. So, but as I said, the law isn't specific on that. That would have to be decided by the board if it's formed.
Thank you very much. Now to the next question from the audience. Why does Chapter 2017-200 refer to a, quote, Gainesville Regional Utility Authority? How is an authority different from an appointed board? Whoa.
Yeah, that's okay. With the caveat that we're now going to ask the economist to try to render a legal opinion and take that for what it's worth. Essentially, the authority. I'm not aware of any legal distinction, because the authority, the one place where the law is clear, is that this would be a board appointed by the city commission with staggered terms. So, the terms are clearly defined in the law. They are staggered so that all the commissioners don't roll off at once. So, you're appointing them over time. I think the initial term would be till 2020, and then 2021, 2022 would go up from there, and then as those commissioners roll off, they'd be replaced or renewed. But if we get into the legal distinction, I don't see one, but again, that's an economist answering a legal question, and there's a reason you don't hire economists to do that.
And I'm an engineer, so I'm not going to answer the legal part, but I think it is,
real trouble.
I think it is important for people to realize this is not your normal independent board. As Julia Reiskin pointed out, this one is pretty out, it doesn't have some of the oversight, some of the controls. When you talk about eminent domain, this board would have the ability to sell, buy, issue bonds, just a lot of stuff. It's much more an extreme independent than your normal ones that we see around.
Mr.
Yeah.
Pilarski.
Yeah, I'd like to add, since I actually have read the bill and had several discussions in regard to it, it is unusual in that most authorities take the assets. This one's not taking the assets. It's serving as almost a pseudo city commission. So they have people that are making decisions for city assets. So, one of the things we're going through right now is negotiating, collective bargaining agreements with GRU, with the CWA. How would that be handled? The employees are still employees of the city. How do you bifurcate the negotiations for the collective bargaining agreements? There's a question as to whether you would actually go to the unions, pull the agreements apart, and have representation by the authority to negotiate those contracts. It seems pretty clear that they don't have, the ability to handle personnel matters, which from a general manager perspective, you start talking about taking another, arrow out of the quiver in my ability to manage with not having the ability to determine what I pay my employees. That's kind of an odd situation to be in, because that would be part of the city, which is no longer now connected in terms of the authority, the appointed authority. So it's really concerning to me that those questions aren't answered.
Thank you, and we'll go right back to you, Mr. Pilarski, with this next question. From local newspaper, August the 22nd of 2018, I understand, according to the questioner, that GRU rates will increase 2% next month, October. Last year, rates went up 2% also. How does this fit with your graph?
The components of GRU rates are base rate, which covers all the non-fuel elements of our organization. So payroll, outage work, bringing in supplies and materials. Then there's the fuel adjustment. The fuel adjustment is the pass-through. GRU makes no money on its purchase of coal, its natural gas, its biomass material. That's strictly a pass-through. So we had a 2% increase in the base rate last year. We had a 2% this year, but that's only half the bill. So we had a reduction in the fuel adjustment last year that actually made the rate go down. This year, the fuel adjustment stayed the same, base rate went up, and it was about $1.80 on a monthly bill. So 6 out of the last 7 years, GRU has not had a base rate increase prior to this year. That's an unsustainable level, and it's quite honestly not fair to the employees. It's not fair to the community, because one of the things that we pride ourselves in is being one of the most reliable, being one of the most safe, as well as being competitively priced, in spite of what you hear about, and I'll say it again, soaring GRU residential rates, which is simply not true. The reliability that GRU provides through the base rates and having what I believe are the best linemen in the state of Florida. We're in the anniversary of Hurricane Irma, and we were the fastest to return back to service. Now, yeah, we're not on the coast, but in terms of the people that were out in a heavily wooded community like this, it's just absolutely phenomenal. And our people are innovative. They went out before the winds allowed them to fly buckets to get up on wires. They went out and they did their work. And whereas other utilities were sitting back waiting, we sent people out. They determined what needed to be done. If they could do something on the ground, they did. And they laid a groundwork for the rest of the utility members to go out there and do it. Thank you.
With that kind of editorial for the men and women who work at GRU, you better be careful. North and South Carolina may be coming to get your help.
Actually, we're sending some crews up to Santee in anticipation, because it is a brotherhood.
Thank you,
brother.
The next question. With the authority not accountable to elected municipal representatives, how would it be motivated to serve the larger interests of the city? Why would they do anything beyond serving the goals of lower cost?
I'll jump on that question a little bit. So one of the main things you've got to think about, again, as I try to hit this point home, it's about who is governing. So right now it's about who is on the city commission, who the general manager is, who will be on this authority. If the referendum passes, I will have a say in who gets to be on the authority. But once they get on there, what their motivations are, what their aspirations are, that is entirely upon them, and they don't have to worry about being accountable to people. I have to continually communicate because you all put me in this position. You all put me in this position. And so for every decision that I make, whether it's GRU, Gainesville Fire Rescue, you all are going to hold me accountable to that. That inspires me to do a good job. I would imagine that anyone who's appointed to the GRU Authority would probably have the same idea. I want to do a good job. That doesn't mean that their priority is going to be specifically to lower your bill, because they are going to have to weigh the same things that I have to weigh. And as was mentioned earlier about the base rates, it is unsustainable to claim we're not raising your base rates while inflation raises the price of literally everything else in this country. I don't see how it's tenable in the mind to think inflation will raise the price of everything else except my electricity. It's not going to happen. So, and I try to be cautious about this because I have opposed the referendum, but if it were to pass, I would be supportive of the authority. I would want them to do a great job. I would want them to focus on the things that I have been trying to direct GRU to do, but that is dependent on who those people are, not the structure.
Let me just add, I mean, I really like our UAB. I think it has every member I think is a good, valuable member with good intention. We have a diversity of opinion. So that aside, the challenge is, as a UAB member, is we don't look at the bigger picture of the city. So again, to say what is the appropriate fund transfer, I don't know, because I don't make those decisions. So it's that split that makes it kind of an odd scenario.
And the law is, again, the law does allow for a commissioner to be removed either for, say, demographic reasons. Now, for example, it requires that there's one person from outside the city, but within the GRU service territory. So if that person were to, let's say, move inside the city, and they're no longer filling that seat unless somebody else takes the place, again, they could be removed for that. But mostly it's removed if you do something wrong. But to me, the primary source of accountability is through that annual consumer report. Now, HB 759 only specifies that consumer report will be a rate projections and then rate comparisons. But to the extent that you guys care about other stuff, reliability of service, access to service, again, those parameters need to be established if the authority is established. Because right now, with, as I noted, a couple of exceptions in the law, it's pretty much a blank slate what this group is going to do. So there's a lot of uncertainty. Basically, if you support the authority, you still got a lot of work to do after the vote, because there's a lot of work that has to be done to actually shape what it would do and how it would do it.
I've got an additional comment I forgot to mention. The bill also stipulates who can and cannot serve on the board. So anyone who's been a commissioner before 2022, which those years haven't even happened yet, you cannot be selected to serve on the board. They don't include someone to represent small businesses, but they include someone to represent large businesses. Just want to point that out.
I'd like to also add, I've worked for private industry in the utility field. I've worked for Constellation Energy, a Fortune 500 company. One of the things that I've found in my experience, they will work to the level of their permits. They won't go beyond. There's no benefit for a private organization to do something like that. The authority is creating a quasi-private organization with this type of referendum. So, and this is something you don't hear as well. There's been some discussions about red tide and the detrimental effects to the environment. Probably you don't know that we are very advanced, progressive in terms of nutrient removal at our wastewater facilities. One of the first in the state to have the extent of nutrient removal, which is taking nitrogen out of the wastewater influent. And as a result, we have sweetwater wetlands that is passive remediation. We've mitigated the ability to actually have impacts such as red tide, with the algae growth and those types of things. So there are some environmental stewardship issues that GRU is just absolutely ahead of the curve that may or may not continue with a new board. The same thing with the protection of our well fields with the Murphy plant, and never losing that plant and impacting the potable water that comes to the community. So just something to think about.
Thank you. We'll turn now to the next question. I'll read it verbatim. How does the transfer compare to what a private utility would pay in all taxes, wheeling rates, and dividends to stockholders?
I would say that the Chamber of Commerce did a study they commissioned several years ago, and as a result of that study, the general fund transfer was reduced. I think it was somewhere around $38 million 5 or 6 years ago. The city, general government, took a reduction in that amount, and then when we got engaged in the biomass contract, they substituted the property taxes that they would be receiving for the general fund transfer. So the city reduced that amount down in the 8 to 9% range. Is it higher than some utilities? Yes. Is it lower than some utilities? Yes. It's hard to compare some of the private organizations. It's probably mid to upper mid range, but I wouldn't say it's excessive.
Thank you. Next. One reason given for raising GRU rates was the need to install smart meters. This was proposed years ago and was rejected. There was and is a real concern for safety with these kinds of meters. Today, there are additional issues regarding hacking. I hope GRU will not install smart meters. This could be detrimental to our health or power availability. What is the position of the proposed board regarding smart meters? Do we know?
Well, the proposed board would, they could get rid of it, they could keep it. It's a hypothetical board as it exists right now. Keep that in mind. Whatever ads you see, whatever people tell you this board can or can't do, it's all hypothetical. The City Commission, you can look at what we have directed and what we have not directed. I want to touch on this a little bit. So the reality of cybersecurity, that is a stark reality indeed, but I don't see why technology 20 years older is any more secure than modern technology. So the smart metering needs a couple of layers. First, you need the internal layers at GRU. They need to update their internal software, which I wish that years ago the commission would have gone through with it, because then we would be a step ahead and we would be closer to the smart metering. I think I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Well, I can talk a little bit about the smart meters too, because that's something that's near and dear to my heart, because I look at the fact that we have 45 meter readers that are in our departments that go. What did I say? Okay, yeah. So we have people actually going out in the neighborhoods through thick and thin, reading these meters, and it's not an efficient use of manpower. We're in a college community, so there's people coming in and out of housing on a regular basis. We have to roll trucks to go out to those areas and actually, meet with people, have the meter turned on, those types of things. Highly, highly inefficient. We think the payback on smart meters and AMI, as we call it, automatic metering installations, are incredibly strong. So we're really looking forward to that. The cybersecurity issue, I mean, we have a very strong cybersecurity presence within GRU. The health benefits that are being talked about, I don't know of any of those health benefits from, they're basically the meters are the meters we'd be using, and they have an ERTS chip that are in the ERTS chip that can be read. And we have the ability to actually set up mini networks that can Wi-Fi that information in. It may actually have the ability to help, with Wi-Fi down the road with some of these installations. So, I mean, this is just an absolute boom. But the biggest element for me is that, let's get back to bills again. People's biggest problem with bills isn't that it's $5 or $6 more a month. It's the surprise they get because they've had a water leak that's not detected until the next bill cycle, and they get a $400 higher bill. Well, when you have smart meters, we can send you out an alert on your text or email that week or that day. Now that's what's important to me, and I think it should be important to everybody in the community. And for the ones that can least afford it, they need smart meters. So I'm very passionate, as you can tell, about that. And I think it's something that we need to go forward with, and I really appreciate the commissioner here being a proponent of that in the future too.
And at the risk of broken record, the bill says operate, manage, control, responsible for a budget, responsible for a consumer report of some sort. Aside from that, nothing. So any input it has on operation decisions, including smart meters, system planning, anything, that's all would be not known at this point.
And again, looking at the current UAB, when we kind of went down and did a straw poll, what are people excited about? I think half of us said, AMI, smart meters was at the top of the list. It's power. It's the ability, just to give you a quick example, electric vehicles. I'm picking up my Tesla 3 on Monday. I'm very excited. But under the current system, I would go home at 5 o'clock at the end of the day, or 6 in my case, and go home and plug it in at the worst time for GRU. GRU with smart meters can suddenly give me a price signal and say, instead of making us turn on expensive peakers, charge in the middle of the night. I save money, GRU saves money, everyone's bills go. There's so much you can do. Data is power. It's a really exciting.
And if, I don't know this number off the top of my head, you might know it, Ed. What is the projected possible savings from installing this across the utility?
Well, we're talking about upwards of 10% return on investment, if that's what you mean. We think that it could be in the $4 to $5 million, I think, a year range, which is not all on the electric side, but can mitigate future rate increases that we put out there because we don't have that information at this point.
And now the panel gets a break because the next two questions fall to me to answer, and they're both good. I'll read them both and then respond to them as a group. First, why would the League of Women Voters have a panel discussion, 1, without representation of the PACs opposed to the referendum, 2, without a woman, and 3, without a lawyer? And another question to the League of Women Voters that I will represent as my answer. Do you represent the forum to be a balanced presentation? Where is the other side? Let me try to deal with those issues as I was involved in the planning from first day to last. One of the wonderful things about Gainesville is the absolute richness of the intellectual, experiential pool of men and women who understand issues of utilities and management and dozens and dozens and dozens of other issues. When we were assembling this panel, we were aware of the appropriateness, indeed the need, to select representatives across gender, race, ethnicity, experience, training, borders. We went into this knowing that we wanted to be diverse. Unfortunately, despite in 2 instances requests that got very close to harassment, we were unable to get representatives to join this panel that would have represented some of those options, specifically attorney and woman. As to the issue of why we don't have, quote, the other side, the League of Women Voters, not many months ago, had a wonderful, exciting, stimulating debate, specifically designed to bring representatives from both the yes and no points of view. And they mixed it up between themselves, among themselves, and with the audience for 2 hours. So we had done the debate. What we intended today was to do something different. What we intended today was to create a forum based on experience of men, in this case, who are very close to the ground, very close to the issues that are at the heart of this referendum. So we wanted this to be different from a debate, because we had done that. But I do appreciate those questions, and a couple of us lost sleep over the absence of some folks that were on other sides of some of these borders that we now recognize have to be erased if we are to pursue inclusion in all of our activities. I appreciate those 2 questions. Let's move on now. The panel has had a little rest. I'll do my best to do justice to this question. Looking ahead to major decisions we can expect to face, for example, power plant replacement, infrastructure improvements, expansion, how might the proposed governance structure impact the ultimate decisions reached? How might where we get to be different under the 2 forms of governance? And again, you can lead off as you wish.
The broken record, there's no specifications in the bill as to how those decisions will be made, only that it will be made by people who are not elected. The benefit to having people who are elected to making those decisions is that they are massive financial decisions that, as we have seen, have impacts that go beyond the tenure of the commissioners who set those decisions in motion. You all have the ability to communicate with us and to make those changes if necessary. That goes away with a GRU authority. If they thought that it would be a great idea to run a natural gas pipeline from here to Dakota, guess what? They could do that. And you're not going to stop it. Unless the state legislature is going to stop it. What are they stopping these days? It's so important that we understand the difference between what is being peddled by the other side, and I'm going to call it out because it is hundreds of thousands of dollars from Tallahassee public special interests, private special interests, that are funding television commercials and flyers and all these things. There's a difference between what has been proposed and what is being said. What has been proposed is a simple, well, it's not as simple, but it's a change in government structure. What you want out of your GRU is not being voted on. What you want out of GRU, you can communicate to myself and my colleagues. We represent you. If it's a GRU authority, that's not the case.
Yes?
I'd also like to add that, you know, the idea of transparency is something that, you know, as a GRU general manager, is difficult to facilitate all the time. You know, I come from private industry, and when we looked at buying the biomass plant, we had 24 public meetings. We had numerous UAB meetings as well as city commission meetings, and to get that information out was not easy for me, on the management side. But it's something that the community ought to expect when there's such a decision of that magnitude. So as we went through it, I think there was a lot of things learned from our perspective at GRU, the City Commission, the UAB, as well as the community. And I think those questions, that kind of transparency, that dialogue, that at some point argumentation produces benefits. And that's something that exists today. That's the status quo. There's nothing that in the bill, as with the broken record, that says that will continue. So at some point, the GRU coal plant will go away. What will it be replaced with? Kelly, there's some decisions. The plant is the oldest in the fleet. What will we do? You talked about the renewable, by the end of the century. I think we have to chart our way. I wanted to mention, by the way, that any particular time, GRU can be at 30% renewable. The energy you're using is 30% renewable because we're using the biomass plant. We have the solar feed-in tariff. So there's a lot of things that fit the community needs. Solar is to the point now where it's another source that isn't just, let's get environmental, let's get green. It's very competitive with other fossil fuels. And we are actively looking at solar farms as new sources of generation. And that's something we'll be talking about with the City Commission and the UAB as well. So I don't think there's anything in the bill that guarantees that, but you can correct me if I'm wrong.
No, but it is worth noting that the five boards for municipal utilities that do exist, again, JEA, Orlando, New Smyrna Beach, Kissimmee, and Fort Pierce. That input in terms of that strategic planning process, long-term planning process, is a part of all those boards. But that would have to be established in this case. You can't just assume it.
And I'm not going to talk about solar, but to surprise. But I did want to talk about one thing that would be weird with the authority is that it's not part of it's when it goes to get bonding. The city has a great bonding rate, and I'm not an expert on this, but my understanding is that it would be the bonding agencies have said they would not feel quite the same about this independent authority because of how it's structured. And before you respond to that, I was going to, and I'm probably not supposed to ask questions, but I know you've said a number of times this will have to be settled. I have a question. Who settles this stuff? Who settles this salary question and money and all that? You don't have to answer that right now, but I'm just, is that the new authority?
Usually when a new regulatory authority of some sort is established, typically the first order of business, well, in this case, the first order of business is appoint a president and a vice president once the committee members are named. But then it's to hold a series of public forums to establish the rules and procedures for that authority. So presumably, and again, it's speculation because the law doesn't say, but presumably once the board is established, they would set about establishing those various rules and procedures. A regulatory authority typically has some sort of open hearing. The public is allowed to comment, and then the commissioners themselves vote on, should we do this, yes or no? After hearing all the public comments. But again, the law is gray on how that would be determined. But typically, it's done in a public hearing, and then the commissioners themselves vote, yes, we're going to do it this way, no, we're not going to do it that way.
When you say commissioners, you mean the members of the independent?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
And I'm going to break in here now because I have a feeling that Dr. Jacobson read the next card with the issue that he brought up. So the next question from the audience is, what are the potential impacts of an authority on bond rating and existing bond covenants? I think you're poised to answer that.
Yeah, I'd like to take that since I've been dealing with the rating agency since day one. every year, we meet with the rating agencies. We have a lot of bonds, and so it's very important for us to put our best foot forward because the bond rating agencies literally represent our investors. You know, there's many legs to the stool for an organization like GRU. The investors are very important to us. In the last rating that we got when we went through the purchase of the plant, they specifically noted in their narrative, they put a narrative together that, I'm sorry Barry, but they said that given additional powers to the UAB for rate setting would be viewed as credit negative. They literally came out and said the UAB probably shouldn't have rate setting authority. Now, they also talked about the referendum, and they said that although there are some authorities that work and some that don't, the jury is still out, and I'm paraphrasing at this point, but the jury's still out as to whether that would be credit negative or credit neutral. But they were concerned about the ability of a new board to balance the bondholders' interest and the interests of the customers. So the rating agencies are sitting back going, don't know. Don't know about this one. But they do know that with a UAB given rate setting authority, that would be credit negative. Now between you and me, just us in the room, I don't know the difference between a new authority and a UAB that would have rate-making authority. It seems to be the same thing to me.
All right, thank you. Next, given the high commercial rates, why aren't businesses installing more solar?
All right, I will take that one.
I almost called on that.
Businesses are installing more solar. I mean, quite honestly, it helps my world because we're installing an alternative, and so we're here to help. But it is happening. As Ed said earlier, though, GRU and FP&L and Duke is saying we need to be installing more solar. Quite honestly, I probably won't be the one to do it. I don't work at that scale, but I'm happy to see that happening.
So this was one of the major reasons, at least for me, it was one of the major factors why I was comfortable with the PPA purchase. Because since we lowered the fuel adjustment after the PPA purchase, between February and July, which is about when I last did the calculations, we have saved Gainesville businesses about $4 million because that was a wholesale cut on the fuel adjustment because of that purchase. So we have taken that seriously. We do recognize that it is a challenge for our community, but again, the bill does nothing to solve this problem. The bill offers no solution to this. You want to come up with a solution together, then let's do that. I'm your representative. We can come up with that solution together. And I have had many meetings with representatives of the Chamber of Commerce who continually tell us this is a huge issue for our businesses. This is a huge issue for people who are trying to come to Gainesville. And I don't tell them anything other than, okay, this is what we've done so far, now let's look at other solutions. Double Envelope was a company that was looking to move outside of Gainesville because of commercial rates. Not only did they get this wholesale reduction, but they worked with the city commission, and I don't want to advertise this too loudly, but they worked with the city commission to try to come up with special manufactured rates for East Side companies, because we do want to attract more businesses to the East Side, and they were a perfect candidate, and we did not want to see them move. They had over 80 employees working there. So again, this is the point of why I say this story, is because this is something that your city commission can do. Your elected representatives, people who have a say. You all have a say.
I'm sorry, but I have to add, piggyback again. This is where the conflation of the facts happens. Yes, our commercial rates are higher. We've reduced them to the point that people like Double Envelope, Exactech, and places like that have said, wow, we are seeing a difference. We don't see the need to do this any further because we're taking away the economics of that. But people are hearing that about the rates and thinking it applies to commercial rates. It does not. Commercial rates are competitive with the rest of the state, and on 1,000 kW, lower than the national average. But what you hear is the opposite. GRU is turning up the heat. No, it's not. It's reducing rates.
Thank you. This question is for either or both Curry and Belaski. Belarski, I'm so sorry.
I forget how to pronounce it sometimes.
Oh, boy, me too. What other utility boards were, one, created in the same manner as how HB 759 came about, and two, would have the same powers as the authority would have, and in parentheses, and that puts a firewall between the city commission and the authority?
To the best of my knowledge, they're all established through some sort of public referendum. I mean, they've all been around different amounts of time. But again, in terms of the authorities, for the most part, they tend to have the same powers that are in HB 759. They approve a budget of some sort. Where that changes is the amount of, let's say, independent analysis they do of the budget. So one of the things that is uncertain regarding the authority is, do they just take a look? The utility comes in, presents them with a budget, PowerPoint, gives them some documentation. The commissioners look at it and say, "Oh, that looks about right." And it's a bit of a simplification, but not too far. But that's basically, if you look at JEA's board, and you see a budget presentation from JEA, JEA comes in, these are our numbers. The board doesn't really do any independent analysis of, hey, you got that cost, at this level, shouldn't it be 4% lower? Our numbers show it should be 4% lower. So we don't know. We don't know how the powers of GRUA would differ from Fort Pierce or from Kissimmee or JEA, Orlando, New Smyrna Beach, just because it's not covered. If you look at what the bill says, all those boards do those same things. But as the saying goes, the devil's in the details. You've got those. You're going to have little differences from one to the next. As I said in my opening remarks, the Fort Pierce Authority takes a look at $30,000 contracts and $90,000 budget transfers from one fund to the next. Does JEA's board do that? No. $90,000 to JEA is nothing. So we don't know how the authority is going to be similar or different from others in Florida just because it hasn't been established.
Thank you. I just counted the remaining questions. They are 8. We have a little less than 30 minutes, and in the interest of trying to give everyone who came here the benefit of an answer, I'll ask you guys to divide 8 into 28 and pattern your answers that way. Here we go. What about water rates and other parts of GRU? What would this bill do to other parts of the utility and how they run?
I got the answer on that. We don't know. I will tell you that, this is a question I would like to answer though. People have talked about our water rates being high. That's typically because they have a broken line and they get a bill, it's $400, and they haven't found it beyond the billing cycle. Until the billing cycle is ended. That's why I like the smart meter concept. The other thing is we're doing so many innovative things with nutrient removal, keeping care of the springs, and those types of things that other utilities simply aren't. Smaller utilities that don't have that kind of professional expertise that we have.
And so just to add real quick, because I talk to people, again, all the time on the bills, and they'll say, oh, when I went from GRU to Clay, I'm using the same amount of electricity, my bill cut in half. But they forget, and I'm glad the questioner brought that up. Their Clay bill, they're on a well, they're on a septic tank, it's not water, wastewater, it's trash, all that other stuff that's in their, quote, electric bill.
Oh yeah, and by the way, if you go to GRU.com, the website, you go to manage my bills, there's electric rate comparison. You can put in your consumption and it will show what the GRU bill is, it will show what the Duke bill is, and it will show what the Clay bill is. Put it in there and you'll see.
And 759 is clear that it applies to all services. I know we've been talking about electric, but it would apply to all services.
Thank you. This one's to anyone in the room. Why should we give up our autonomy? Why do proponents want this? Those answers are under the time limit.
I tell you what, when I was in college, I went to go visit then Representative Perry in his office, and I wasn't involved in local government at this time. I was just a college student, and I talked about this bill, and I said, "What's the motive? What's this here?" And he tells me, "Well, because independent studies show that you're going to get a better utility out of it." And that was his only argument. I think that this is a reaction to the PPA, specifically a reaction to the power purchasing agreement that was signed. It was a bad contract, but that doesn't mean that you change 100 years of wisdom in Gainesville. 100 years of wisdom which has helped us to fund beautiful parks. One of the top of the line fire rescue services in the state. The list goes on and on. I understand the frustration when you see $77 million a year going out of your community when GRU could have built it, GRU could have ran it, and it would have been not a huge problem. I understand that consternation, but it doesn't mean that you go and sell a farm and decide to change what has been working for 100 years.
That's it. Well,
Broadly speaking, there are going to be costs that are going to be incurred establishing this authority. If you are supporting it, I think it's because you think that these costs are going to be outweighed in some manner by efficiency improvements, either from the utility or from the city. That would be, I'm not going to speak necessarily for people who support it, but as an economist standpoint, that would be a reason to support it. But then the flip side is if you don't think there are efficiency improvements from either GRU or from the city, commensurate with the additional costs of this authority, then you probably wouldn't.
that cues up very nicely and leads into the next question. If the voters approve the authority, it appears to be, and later on, it appears to be an incorrect decision. How would the utility be returned to the city from the legislature?
That, this was, one of the realities of regulation is that regulators are creations of legislation. So they are made by legislation, they can be unmade by legislation. So if at some point the authority is, people look at it and say, well, maybe that wasn't such a great idea. It could be unmade in the same manner that it was made in the first place by an act of the state legislature.
Thank you. If Congress had approved the carbon exchange initiative, would the biomass plant have been considered a, in quotes, wise purchase?
I'd like to answer that because I came on board and, first thing, I mean, quite honestly, how are we going to reduce rates? I came on board, we were at $141 for a monthly bill. It still wouldn't have taken the excess capacity payment that we were making. It would have made everyone else's bill a little higher, but it still would have kept the bills this high. So it may have closed the gap, but a bad contract's a bad contract, to be honest with you.
Good. Next. Two-sided question. Why is there not a comparable analysis of benefits losses? Why has not a comparable analysis of benefits losses that occurred since the legislature hijacked our airport into an authority? Okay. How come we let the airport go to an authority without the kind of analysis we've gotten here? Might be a paraphrase of that, or my own question. Would anybody like to There's one under the time limit, who knows?
Yeah, I'm not familiar with the situation for transportation.
As a product of the Jesuit school education, it's a mystery.
Sometimes that's not a bad answer.
I can offer maybe a theory. It's pretty clear who's pushing this referendum. And when the state legislature wants to accomplish something, they need standard bearers. And so the reason why you've seen such analysis and such pushback is because it's been so public for so long. It's been defeated in the legislature for years and years and years. And it wasn't just until this last session that it finally passed and was signed by the governor. So there's a standard bearer. And thankfully, the community has fought back against that standard bearer because it's just wrong.
Our next questioner begins with a statement. JEA is established under city charter. This authority would be under state law, meaning the authority we're talking about tonight. Jack City Council has some powers. The question is, why should we repeal our local charter powers? Which may allow some of you to make a bit of a summary, although we have a couple of other questions available that I'd like to get to.
There's just a big difference between the JEA authority and then what's being proposed. There's a huge difference. In Jacksonville, the mayor is a strong mayor. The mayor has the ability to appoint and revoke people on the advisory boards and the authority boards all across the city of Jacksonville. In Gainesville, the mayor does not have that authority. So that is a structural difference between Jacksonville city government and our city government.
And just to add to that, you know, early on you heard a lot of proponents talk about JEA. We should be more like them until this $4 billion nuclear deal. Suddenly that hasn't quite been, you know, the model they've been proposing.
Thank you. Here's a memory question. Does anyone remember when a group from the chamber tried to take GRU from us when John Kelly was our director?
No.
No. You were no liar.
And this one is to Dr. Curry. Being new to this topic, I wonder why scant focus on what appears to be an open door to privatization. For example, why is this 3 times failed bill so important to the authors? And I think the issue here is around the possibility of opening a door to privatization.
Yeah, I mean, again, I have no idea what the authors are thinking. But as I said before, I think one reason to support it is if you really believe that the increased costs of this authority, whatever it is, are going to be outweighed by some benefit, you know, either a monetary benefit or, you know, some other benefit within this broad product that we call utility service, then, you know, clearly somebody who wrote this bill in the first place thinks that, you know, that analysis, that the benefits outweigh the costs. As far as being an avenue to privatization, I mean, certainly the authority, again, it's in the law, that the authority would have within their scope would be disposition of assets. I don't know, you know, in terms of privatization what that would mean. For example, when the city of Vero Beach agreed to sell their electric utility to Florida Power and Light, it did require a public referendum in order to approve that going forward. You may have heard that Jacksonville, well, they're not really having the conversations now, but for a time Jacksonville was talking about potentially privatizing, and in Jacksonville's case, it wouldn't have required a public referendum as long as the city council basically approved the disposition of the assets, then it could go through. So again, it's not clear to me, the question kind of presumes that this would be an avenue to privatization, but that part of it's not clear to me entirely. But again, I don't know sitting along like the councilman does. So.
I can tell you this, if the referendum were to pass, the first question I would ask anyone who's applying to be on the authority is, do you support GRU being a public or a private utility? And if they said private, I would say you do not have my vote.
And just, I'll introduce an alternative theory. These are politicians doing this. It could be that it was done for politically expedient reasons, that they thought there was a political benefit to them doing that.
All right, and this panel has successfully answered all questions save one. Here's that one. What could our legislators do to require UF to purchase power from GRU? Oh boy, they're laughing. It must be either the end or a great question or both.
No, it's
To purchase power from GRU. Why are they allowed to be an exception to utility service territory?
So I'm going to first praise UF and then hit them with a stick. First, they are our largest customer. They are our largest customer. UF Health now has the Southeast Energy Station providing energy to their 2 new towers. They're beautiful new towers. The third one's going to come up soon. However, they do not get all of their power from GRU. They should get all of their power from GRU. I don't know that the state legislature can require them to do that, although the state legislature seems to think that they can require people to do a lot of things, so maybe this can be added to their list of preemptions.
This is a great opportunity for me because actually I talked with UF when I first came here. And there's this little thread of myth again, the urban myth that's out there. Well, I wish we could have Duke and get cheaper power than GRU. Guess what? We went to UF and we proposed a deal because we can sell wholesale power to them, not under the tariff that they have. And we put a deal before University of Florida that was cheaper than what they're buying from Duke. That's right, cheaper. But we can't provide the other things that they get, like the endowment money and other things that Duke can give them. We're a public entity. And then they also bought the transmission line going through the easement, through the campus for somewhere around $50 million. We don't need that transmission line. We could supply them off our distribution line. So, they are going to be replacing the 50 megawatt or 40 megawatt steam unit that's there. We've talked to them about the possibility that we could replace that and we could do something like that. But up till now, there's still been that resistance because it's more than just UF on the campus. It's the endowment and it's the other ways. We can't have GRU over the stadium, Spurrier Field, but Duke can have that kind of stuff. So it's hard to compete.
And then to answer the question, what could the legislature do? Now, the structure of the utility industry in the state of Florida, it's something that falls under the 10th Amendment. The federal government, any power not expressly lying with the federal government lies with the states. And since when they wrote that, there was no electricity grid, pretty much by default, the local decisions that we make for the electricity system lie here with the states. Other states, such as states in the Midwest, in the Northeast, they have restructured their electricity sector in some way. Sometimes it goes all the way to allowing customers to choose their electricity provider. Sometimes it's just a restructuring of the wholesale market. So the short answer is those are types of things that the legislature could do. Those questions do periodically come up in Tallahassee, but we've yet to see a bill that would restructure Florida's electricity sector. We've yet to see a bill like that get out of committee. But the question does come up.
Thank you. Our goal tonight was to provide men and women who came with some data, some hypotheses, and some experience. As you know, you will be faced with one of the longest ballots voters have had in a very, very long time. Preparation of this sort and the sort that you're doing in other ways on your own, I hope, will help you feel greater confidence when you sort through what will turn out to be a massive ballot. To help, in addition, we have at the back of the hall a one-pager prepared by the League of Women Voters for the voter guide. It is an attempt to talk about the pros and cons, so get at the issue raised by at least one of our questioners, and gives you an idea about, here are the results if you vote yes, here are the results if you vote no. Taking that information, of course, is free, and it's at that very back table as you exit the room. I would like to thank our panelists for jobs well and efficiently done. I'd like to thank our audience for thoughtful questions across a broad range of issues. This concludes this forum by the League of Women Voters. Thank you for your attendance. Drive carefully. Goodbye.
And go.